Imagine a city larger than anything in ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. A city with running water, indoor plumbing, and streets laid out with such geometric precision that modern engineers still marvel at the planning. A city of perhaps 40,000 people humming with trade, craft, and culture, and then silence. Not the silence of conquest, not the silence of fire and ruin. Just silence. The people vanish, the city empties, and the writing they left behind. We still cannot read a single word of it. This is not a mystery from the fringes of history. This is one of the largest civilizations the ancient world ever produced. It stretched across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. And yet, most people have never heard its name. What happened to the Indus Valley Civilization? Why did a culture so sophisticated, so organized, so clearly advanced, simply stop? And what are they trying to tell us in that script no living person has ever decoded? If questions like these keep you up at night, the way they keep historians and archaeologists awake, you are in the right place. Before we go further, if you appreciate history told honestly, without myths dressed up as facts, consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep making these deep dives. Now, let's go back, way back. We are in the year roughly 2600 BCE. The place is the northwestern corner of the Indian subcontinent, modern-day Pakistan and northwestern India, stretching into parts of Afghanistan. The Indus River, one of the great rivers of Asia, cuts through a vast floodplain. And along its banks, and the banks of a now dry river, called the Ghaggar Hakra, something extraordinary is happening. People are building cities, not villages, not camps, cities. Planned, organized, sophisticated urban centers with a level of civic engineering that would not appear again in this part of the world for thousands of years. The two most famous of these cities are called Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Archaeologists have also excavated sites at Dholavira, Rakhigarhi, Lothal, and over 1,000 other locations spread across roughly 1.5 million square kilometers. To put that in perspective, that is a territory larger than Western Europe. This civilization is known today by several names. The Indus Valley Civilization, the Harappan Civilization, or sometimes the Indus-Saraswati Civilization. It flourished for roughly 1,000 years, from approximately 2600 BCE to 1900 BCE, though its roots go back even further. And for most of recorded history, the world had completely forgotten it existed. That is the first thing that should stop you in your tracks. A civilization of this scale, this complexity, this geographical reach, erased so completely from human memory that even the people living on top of its ruins had no idea what lay beneath their feet. So how did we find it? And why did it take so long? The answer to that question is partly colonial history, partly archaeology, and partly a story of accidental discovery that reads almost like fiction. In the 1850s, British engineers were building a railway line through the Punjab region of what is now Pakistan. They needed ballast, heavy material to pack beneath the railway tracks. Local laborers directed them to a nearby mound of ancient, fire-hardened bricks. The engineers used those bricks, millions of them. They laid them under miles of railway track, never knowing they were using the ruins of a 4,000-year-old city as construction material. That city was Harappa. It was not until the 1920s that systematic archaeological excavations began, led by British and Indian archaeologists working under the Archaeological Survey of India. John Marshall, the Director General of the survey, oversaw the early digs. In 1924, he announced to the world that a previously unknown civilization had been discovered. The academic world was stunned. Here was proof of a Bronze Age urban culture in South Asia that was contemporary with ancient Sumer and the Old Kingdom of Egypt, but entirely distinct from both. And here is where the mystery deepens rather than resolves. Because unlike Mesopotamia, where archaeologists found clay tablets covered in cuneiform script that scholars eventually decoded, or Egypt, where the Rosetta Stone unlocked the hieroglyphs, the Indus Valley Civilization left behind a script that has defeated every serious attempt at decipherment for over a century. The Indus script appears on small carved seals, on pottery, on copper tablets, on ivory rods, and on what appear to be amulets or tokens. Roughly 5,000 inscribed objects have been found. The script itself contains somewhere between 400 and 600 distinct signs, a number that suggests it is neither a simple alphabet nor a pure logographic system like Egyptian hieroglyphs, but something in between, possibly a logo-syllabic script where some signs represent sounds and others represent whole words or concepts. The inscriptions are almost always short, shockingly short. The average inscription is just 5 signs long. The longest known inscription contains only 26 signs. This is a critical problem. You cannot decode a language from 5-word sentences, especially when you have no bilingual text, no Indus equivalent of the Rosetta Stone, and when the underlying spoken language is completely unknown. Estimates vary, but most researchers believe the script was used primarily for administrative or commercial purposes, labeling goods, marking ownership, recording transactions. If that is true, it would explain the brevity. But it also means we may never recover the literature, the mythology, the laws, or the religious texts of this civilization, even if we do crack the code. And people have tried. Dozens of serious scholars and hundreds of enthusiastic amateurs have proposed decipherments over the decades. Some have argued the script represents an early form of Sanskrit, the ancient language of the Indian subcontinent. Others have proposed Dravidian languages, the family of languages spoken today in southern India. Still others have suggested connections to Sumerian, to Proto-Elamite, or to entirely lost language families. None of these proposals has achieved anything close to scholarly consensus. In 2004, a team of computational linguists published a study using statistical analysis to argue that the script shows patterns consistent with natural language, meaning it is almost certainly a real writing system and not simply a set of symbols or pictograms. This was an important finding, because some skeptics had suggested the Indus script might not be a true writing system at all. But proving it is language and actually reading that language are two very different things. The silence of the Indus script is not just an academic puzzle. It is the silence that stands between us and everything we most want to know about these people. What did they call themselves? What gods did they worship? Who led them, and how? What did they fear? What did they celebrate? Without the script, we are left to read their civilization entirely through objects, and objects, however eloquent, do not speak in sentences. So what do the objects tell us? They tell us a great deal, actually, and much of what they tell us is genuinely astonishing. Start with the cities themselves. Mohenjo-daro, the largest known Indus site, was laid out on a grid. Streets ran at right angles. City blocks were standardized. Houses were built from kiln-fired bricks, and here is a detail that should make you pause. Those bricks were made in a standardized ratio of 1:2:4. That same ratio, across hundreds of sites, spread across 1.5 million square kilometers, over hundreds of years. Think about what that means. It means there was some form of standardization, some shared system of weights and measures, some central authority or cultural agreement powerful enough to ensure that a brick made in Harappa in the Punjab matched a brick made in Dholavira on the coast of Gujarat, over 1,000 kilometers away. Archaeologists have confirmed this with physical measurements. The bricks match, the weights match. Small stone cubes used for measuring have been found across the civilization in a perfectly consistent system of ratios. Even the drainage systems follow consistent engineering principles across widely separated sites. This is not primitive, this is organized. This is administered. And yet here is one of the most debated and genuinely puzzling aspects of the Indus civilization. Archaeologists have found almost no evidence of kings. In Mesopotamia, royal palaces dominate the archaeological record. In Egypt, the pharaohs built monuments to themselves that still stand today. In early China, royal tombs overflow with wealth and symbols of power. But in the Indus Valley, there are no royal palaces identified with confidence. There are no grand tombs filled with treasures. There are no monumental statues of rulers. There are no battle scenes carved into walls, no images of warriors triumphing over enemies. The cemeteries that have been excavated show relatively modest differences in burial wealth. Some people were buried with more objects than others, suggesting some social stratification, but nothing like the staggering inequality visible in contemporary Egyptian royal burials, where pharaohs were interred with enough gold to fund armies. What does this mean? Historians debate this extensively. Some argue that the Indus civilization was governed by a merchant or priestly class rather than warrior kings, a kind of commercial oligarchy or theocracy. Others suggest it may have been organized as a confederation of city-states with shared cultural norms, but without a centralized political authority. A few researchers have proposed that the relative equality visible in the archaeological record reflects a genuinely more egalitarian society, though this interpretation is contested and should be treated with caution given the limits of what archaeology can tell us about social structure. What is not contested is the sophistication of Indus urban planning. Mohenjo-daro had a structure archaeologists call the Great Bath, a large, carefully waterproofed tank roughly 12 meters long and 7 meters wide, built with bitumen-sealed bricks and fed by a well. Its purpose is unknown, but the leading interpretation is that it served some ritual or purification function. The parallel to later Hindu traditions of sacred bathing is striking, though drawing a direct line between Indus religion and Hinduism requires considerable caution. The city also had what appears to be a large granary or storage complex, though some archaeologists have challenged this interpretation in recent decades. There were multi-story buildings. There were covered drains running beneath the streets, brick-lined channels that carried wastewater away from homes and into larger collection drains. Individual houses had bathrooms. Some had what appear to be toilets connected to the drainage system. This level of urban sanitation infrastructure would not appear again in Europe until the Roman Empire, roughly 2,000 years later. Let that land for a moment. 2,000 years of sanitation technology, lost and then reinvented. The Indus people were also sophisticated traders. Archaeological evidence shows they had commercial contacts stretching from Afghanistan to the Persian Gulf. Indus seals and artifacts have been found in Mesopotamian sites, including the ancient city of Ur. Mesopotamian texts refer to a trading partner called Meluha, and many scholars believe this refers to the Indus region. If that identification is correct, it means the Sumerians knew about this civilization, traded with it, and wrote about it, even as the Indus people themselves left us no written record we can read. The seals themselves are among the most hauntingly beautiful objects from the ancient world. Carved from stetite, a soft stone that hardens when fired, they show animals with extraordinary precision and artistry. There is a bull with a magnificently detailed dewlap. There are elephants, tigers, crocodiles, and rhinoceroses. And then there is the most famous image from the entire civilization. A figure seated in what appears to be a yogic posture, surrounded by animals wearing a horned headdress. Archaeologists have called this figure the Proto-Shiva or the Pashupati seal, Lord of Animals, because of its apparent similarity to later Hindu iconography of the god Shiva. This is one of the most contested images in South Asian archaeology. Some scholars see it as clear evidence of religious continuity between the Indus civilization and later Hinduism, suggesting that elements of the world's oldest living religion may trace back over 4,000 years to these cities. Others argue this is wishful pattern matching, projecting later religious meanings onto an image whose true significance we cannot know. Both sides have a point, and that tension between the tantalizing similarities and the unbridgeable silence is perhaps the defining experience of studying the Indus civilization. Now, we need to talk about the collapse, because around 1900 BCE, something happened, something profound and irreversible. The great cities began to decline. Mohenjo-daro shrank, Harappa contracted. The careful urban planning deteriorated. Later layers of construction show smaller, less well-made buildings crowding into spaces that were once open streets. The standardized brick ratios became inconsistent. The long-distance trade networks frayed. The distinctive Indus material culture, those seals, those weights, that pottery, faded from the archaeological record. By roughly 1700 BCE, the major urban centers of the Indus civilization appear to have been largely abandoned. The population did not disappear. The evidence suggests people dispersed, moving east and south into the Gangetic Plain and the Deccan. But the cities, the trade networks, the administrative system, the script, all of it ended. For generations, the dominant explanation for this collapse was a theory that now carries significant controversy: the Aryan invasion theory. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, many scholars proposed that the Indus civilization was destroyed by invading Indo-Aryan peoples migrating from the steppes of Central Asia, bringing with them the Sanskrit language and the early forms of what would become Vedic religion. The ancient Sanskrit text, the Rig Veda, contains hymns that describe a warrior god named Indra destroying fortified cities, and some scholars interpreted these as memories of the conquest of Indus cities. The archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler, who led major excavations at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa in the 1940s, famously argued that Indra stood accused of the Indus collapse. He pointed to skeletons found in the upper levels of Mohenjo-daro, bodies lying in the streets, apparently unburied, as evidence of a violent end. But subsequent research has largely dismantled this specific narrative. The skeletons Wheeler cited date to different periods and do not represent a single massacre event. There is no clear archaeological evidence of large-scale violent destruction at Indus sites. And the timing is problematic. The major urban decline began well before any proposed wave of Indo-Aryan migration. It is worth noting that this debate carries significant political and cultural weight in South Asia today. Questions about who the Indus people were, what language they spoke, and what their relationship is to modern South Asian populations are deeply entangled with contemporary identity politics, nationalism, and religious claims. Historians and archaeologists must navigate this terrain carefully, and the honest answer is that the genetic and linguistic evidence is still evolving and genuinely contested. What the current evidence does suggest, and this is a field where new research appears regularly, is that the Indus collapse was likely multi-causal. No single explanation accounts for it. Climate change appears to have played a significant role. Paleoclimatological studies published in recent decades suggest that a prolonged drought struck the region beginning around 2200 BCE, part of a broader climate event that also contributed to the collapse of the Old Kingdom in Egypt and the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia around the same time. The monsoon weakened, rivers changed course. The Gagga-Hakra River, which had sustained many of the largest Indus settlements, appears to have dried up substantially during this period. The drying of the Gagga-Hakra is particularly significant because some researchers believe this river may be the Saraswati, a sacred river described in the Rig Veda as mighty and life-giving, which later texts describe as having disappeared. If the Saraswati is the Gagga-Hakra, and if it dried up as the Indus civilization declined, then ancient Indian literature may contain a genuine memory of this environmental catastrophe encoded in mythological language. This is one of those moments where archaeology, climate science, and ancient literature intersect in ways that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. But climate alone does not explain everything. The Indus civilization had survived environmental fluctuations before. The collapse also coincides with evidence of declining trade, possible political fragmentation, and shifts in agricultural patterns. It was, as historians now generally argue, a cascading failure, each problem making the others worse, until the system that had sustained urban life for 1,000 years simply could not hold together anymore. And then the people dispersed. They took their skills, their traditions, and perhaps fragments of their beliefs with them. Some researchers argue that the eastward migration of Indus people into the Gangetic Plain contributed to the cultural substrate from which later South Asian civilization, including elements of Hinduism, urban planning traditions, and craft techniques, eventually emerged. This is a hypothesis, not a certainty. But it is a hypothesis supported by genetic studies published in recent years, which show population continuity between Indus-era remains and later South Asian populations. The genetic evidence, in fact, has revolutionized our understanding of this period in ways that continue to unfold. Ancient DNA analysis, a field that barely existed 20 years ago, has provided new data about who the Indus people were, where they came from, and where their descendants went. The picture that is emerging is complex and does not fit neatly into any single existing narrative. The Indus people appear to have been genetically distinct from the steppe populations that brought Indo-Aryan languages into South Asia, and their genetic legacy is substantial in modern South Asian populations, particularly in southern India. What this means for the language question, the question of what language, or languages the Indus people spoke, remains unresolved. The Dravidian hypothesis has gained some support from genetic evidence, but the matter is far from settled, and serious scholars continue to disagree. Here is something that should make you genuinely uncomfortable about how we think about ancient history. We have excavated only a fraction of known Indus sites. Rakhigarhi, in the Indian state of Haryana, is now believed to be the largest Indus site yet found, larger even than Mohenjo-daro. And it has barely been scratched. There may be sites not yet found at all. The script remains undecoded, the language unknown, the political structure a matter of inference and debate. We are, in a very real sense, still at the beginning of understanding this civilization. And that is both humbling and thrilling, because it means the most important discoveries about the Indus civilization may not be behind us. They may be ahead. Consider what it would mean to decode the Indus script. Not just academically, but in terms of human self-knowledge. We would suddenly be able to hear, for the first time in 4,000 years, the voices of a civilization that shaped the history of an entire subcontinent. We might learn their creation myths, their laws, their prayers. We might discover that they had a name for themselves, because right now, we do not even know what these people called themselves or their civilization. Every name we use, Indus, Harappan, Mohenjo-daro, is a name given by modern archaeologists. Their own names for these things are locked inside those 5 sign inscriptions on small stone seals, waiting. There is an ongoing effort using artificial intelligence and machine learning to approach the decipherment problem in new ways. Computational linguists have mapped the statistical structure of the script in extraordinary detail. Some researchers are using neural networks trained on other ancient scripts to look for structural parallels. Whether these approaches will succeed where human scholarship has not is genuinely unknown. But the attempt is being made, and the tools available today are unlike anything available to earlier generations of scholars. There is also a broader lesson embedded in the Indus story, one that extends beyond archaeology into how we think about civilization itself. The Indus civilization challenges some of our most deep-seated assumptions about what advanced civilization looks like. We tend to assume that complexity requires hierarchy, that large organized societies must have kings, armies, and monumental expressions of power. The Indus evidence, however incomplete, suggests that it may be possible to organize a large, sophisticated, long-lasting civilization with relatively little visible hierarchy and without the kind of martial glorification that dominates the records of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and later empires. Whether this reflects a genuinely more egalitarian social structure or simply reflects the limits of what has survived and what has been excavated is a question archaeologists continue to debate. But the question itself is important. It forces us to ask what we consider normal for civilization and why. The Indus civilization also challenges the geography of history. For too long, the story of ancient civilization has been told primarily through a Mediterranean and Near Eastern lens: Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome. The Indus civilization was larger than any of these. Its people were sophisticated, creative, and connected to the wider ancient world. The fact that it remained unknown to modern scholarship until the 1920s, and that it remains far less famous than Egypt or Greece despite its scale, is itself a historical phenomenon worth examining. Part of the reason is the script. Without readable texts, there are no dramatic stories to tell, no named kings to follow, no wars to describe in detail. History, as it is popularly understood, is largely made of words. The Indus civilization for now speaks only in objects. But those objects speak volumes if we learn to listen. A small bronze figurine found at Mohenjo-daro, known simply as the dancing girl, shows a young woman, perhaps 15 or 16 years old by the proportions, standing with one hand on her hip in a pose of casual confidence, wearing bangles from wrist to shoulder and a necklace. She is naked except for the jewelry. She looks, across 4,000 years, like someone who knew exactly who she was. She was cast in bronze using the lost wax technique, a sophisticated metalworking method. She is one of the most reproduced images in South Asian history, and we know nothing about her. Not her name, not her role, not what she meant to the people who made her. She is the Indus civilization in miniature, beautiful, present, and silent. And then there are the seals, those small carved stones with their short, unreadable inscriptions and their exquisitely detailed animals. Thousands of them found across hundreds of sites. Each one was pressed into clay or wax to mark a package, a container, a shipment. Each one was the signature of a merchant or official whose name we cannot read, certifying goods whose nature we can only guess at in a transaction whose details are lost forever. Unless one day they are not. That is the thing about the Indus mystery. It is not closed. It is open, radically, provocatively open. Every year, new excavations add new data. New genetic studies reframe old questions. New computational approaches attack the script from angles that were not available a decade ago. The civilization that was forgotten for millennia, rediscovered less than a century ago and still only partially understood, continues to yield new surprises. In 2020, excavations at Rakhigarhi yielded ancient DNA from Indus-era burials that provided important new data about the population genetics of the civilization. The results were significant and are still being analyzed and debated. In 2021, researchers published new analysis of climate data suggesting the monsoon failure was even more severe and prolonged than previously estimated. The picture keeps shifting. The Indus civilization is a reminder that history is not a finished story. It is an ongoing investigation, and the most important chapters of some stories have not been written yet, or rather they were written 4,000 years ago on small stone seals, and we are still waiting for someone to read them. Think about that the next time you see a city. The streets, the drainage systems, the standardized building materials, the weights and measures that allow commerce to function, all of it has a history. Some of that history leads back to innovations made by people whose names we do not know, in cities whose names we have only recently recovered, speaking a language that remains, for now, beyond our reach. The Indus Valley Civilization built one of the ancient world's great experiments in urban life. It lasted 1,000 years. It covered a territory larger than any contemporary civilization. It traded across the ancient world. It developed writing. And then it ended, quietly, leaving behind enough evidence to know it was extraordinary, and not quite enough evidence to know why or how, or what its people truly believed. That silence is not a failure of the Indus people. It is a challenge to us, to be curious enough, humble enough, and persistent enough to keep asking the questions. What do you think? Is it possible to truly understand a civilization whose writing we cannot read? Or does the silence of the Indus script mean that some doors to the past are permanently closed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is genuinely one of those historical questions where the debate is still wide open and your perspective matters. If this kind of deep, honest history is what you come here for, subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button is the single best way to help us keep making it. It takes considerable time to research these topics properly, and every subscription genuinely makes a difference. In the next video, we are going to look at another ancient civilization that left behind spectacular ruins and enormous mysteries, but this time in a completely different part of the world. The questions we ask about the Indus Valley turn out to be surprisingly relevant there too. Stay curious.